All right, so today we're going to be working on new site 6. This is our final iteration on the new site project. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. If not, well, today's the last day, so we're done with it after today. So yeah, let's kind of dive into it already. So today we're going to be going over hooking up the login page. So that's something we created yesterday with new site 5, but we didn't actually go about having the login process where we actually pass in the parameters and get authenticated. So let's do that with new site 6. Let me bring up that project. Okay, so new site 6. I've actually done it this time where I've copied down the code, I've installed everything I needed to, so I have my new site 6 up and running. This time I actually chose to just use the code that they provided for us instead of integrating my own new site 5 code, but that's totally your choice. So if we talk about initial setup, again, you can copy over your files from your previous project for new site 5 to continue working on that, or you could just use what we provide for you. All right, so I'm just gonna run npm run update app. I think that's actually what I forgot. So let me do npm run update app. Okay, so running that should add some new test cases. To verify that, let's look at our source API. Yeah, so we have user API tests. All right, cool. I might need to run npm install again, maybe. Okay, so to back up a step, let's talk about authentication. So we're just going to go over a high-level overview today and just get familiar with what actually is going on between the client and server. So for that, let me bring authentication. Okay, so pretty simple process, I guess, from a high level. So when we talk about authentication, basically we have a client and a server that are talking to one another. The client is trying to say, hey, I'm a particular user, so it's going to post some data to the server, usually be username and password, and the server will take in that username and password and verify it against its records. So it probably has a database with passwords in it. I'm going to say, okay, yep, this username and password are legit. Let me respond and say, hey, here's a token. So a token is just a way for the client and server to know that the client is legit. So in this case, when a username and password, a valid username and password are provided, the server will say, okay, that's cool. I'm going to give you this token. And we'll talk about how this token is used. So the client will accept that token and store it on the client side. So this can be stored in various locations. You could store it within just your application state. You could store it within local storage, or you could store it within cookies or session storage. So there's multiple places you could store it, but the client is responsible for taking care of that token. Basically, the server said, here you go. The client has to deal with caching it somewhere. All right, so now that the client has this token, the client can do authorized actions. So one example in this case would be adding a new article to our news site. If I'm logged in, I should be able to create articles. That's the way we just designed our site. So in that case, the client will post like a new article, but within that post data, there's going to be that token that was passed by the server. We're going to pass it back in our data so that the server knows that, hey, this is a legit request, right? We don't want to have to log in each time we want to do an action. So the server will accept the post data and look for this token. And then it'll validate that token saying, okay, is this actually a valid token or is this some garbage that someone's trying to pretend is a token? All right, so the server will check if the token is valid. And then if it is, it'll accept the request. If it's not, it'll send back a reject, like, hey, 401, this is not a valid authorization. But if it's successful, then as normal, the server will respond and say, okay, everything's cool, status 200. And that's basically the entire communication. All right, so for our new site, this is what it's going to look like. Again, we're going to look at this data more in detail. Basically, we're going to log in. So that's something we still need to set up. we have our login page. We actually want to pass the username and password values to our server. The server will authenticate it and then pass back a blob of data. In this case, again, this is particular to our application. This isn't any particular standard. So in this case, it'll pass back like a creation time. This ID value is actually the token. So it's just like a really long string with a bunch of alphanumeric characters. So this is a unique value that obviously can't be easily just guessed or produced. And then we have some additional data about the user. We have the email, the user ID, username. But yeah, the server might pass back anything, so we definitely need to inspect what we're going to get back. All right. So then after we're authenticated, we take this token value and store it somewhere within our client. Again, we can do this right in our application. Normally, we probably want to cache it in like session storage or some cookie so that, if we load up our application again, we still have that token if it's valid. So having that token, we could do authorized actions. In this case, for our news site, that's adding an article. So when we're going to pass, when we're passing, I guess, our data for adding an article, we had to add a new value. Here, we're going to add authorization and pass that token value. Again, this token value is this ID that was passed back. And so since we passed this token out, the server is actually looking for this token. So in news site 4 or 5, whenever we added the ability to add an article, that particular server wasn't looking for any particular token. So anyone that has access to our site could create an article. We didn't have any login or authentication at that point. But now, again, when we send back data, we want to pass a token so the server can say, okay, this is an authorized user. I'm going to accept this, or if it's the other case, it'll reject it and not process the data. All right, so let's actually look at news site 6. Let's get out of here. It's not what I want. Okay, so news site 6. All right, so again, I've installed everything I needed to here. So don't forget to run that npm run update app. This will add some additional test cases and files to your project. Once you've performed. All right, so let's start our server. npm start. All right, popped up in my other window. All right, there we go. So this is, let's go to localhost React. So this is 3000, our default port. There we go, slight delay. All right, so this is what the code we gave you should produce. We should have our app nav at the top and then a bunch of articles on our homepage. And we also have a search feature here. So this was an active filter that we implemented. Okay, so this looks all good, but we want to add some authentication abilities. So let's kind of read our news site 6 and do what they're asking for us. So there's this user API that was created when you ran your update app. We want to add some functionality here. So let's take a look at what we have right now. I'm going to go to my API folder, articles API. This is, again, what we had before for fetching articles, but we want to go to our new file, users API, and kind of add some implementation here. So we have, I guess, sub functions, but we actually want to make this meaningful. So we're going to implement this login method. Okay, so in this module, we have a function that takes in a credentials object, the login accepts a parameter that's going to look like this. So we have an important note here. These are credentials that we're all going to use. These are hard-coded in our server that we're using with News Site 6. So you can't really just use whatever login you want. If you want to dive into the API, you totally can. So if you go to API server, where is this file? User. It's definitely in here somewhere. But yeah, you can kind of search here and add new users as needed. One of these files. So yeah, You guys can find it and add new logins if you want, but we already have some logins created for you. So let's just go with john@doe.com, and the password for that login will be Open Sesame. All right, so again, this will be similar to our add articles request. We're going to be posting the user login to our server, and then once, if that's successful, we should get back the data that we saw in this example. So it should have some data that looks like this, but let's actually verify that. So let's see, new site 6. All right, so let's go about creating that. So I'm going to actually go to my article API, and where we had add article, we have something very similar. So let's do this, copying here. So again, if you don't remember all the details that are required, documentation is part of the job. So let's actually look at that in case I don't remember. So we go to fetch, and post. Example. Okay, using fetch, this is the fetch documentation. All right, so here is an example of a post method. So for doing a post, we still need to pass a URL, but additionally, we need additional data, and that data is going to contain the method. In this case, it can be post, and some additional header information. Again, there's a lot of fields you can include. For our use cases, I think we're just going to need header and then a body. So the body is actually the actual data that we're passing. So let's kind of do that. So again, I copied this over from articles API because we're going to do something very similar. Base URL, I'm just going to hard code it. In this case, we're going to go to HTTP localhost port 3001. Just copy that over so I don't make mistakes. So this will be our base. But we're not going to be going to API articles. We're going somewhere else in this case. So let's see what our docs say. We're going to API users. And then let's just copy this. So we're going to send the request to localhost 3001, which is where our server is running. Again, I know some students had issues yesterday where the server port might have been different. So just make sure you're sending it to the right place. /API/users and then login include user. So let me just paste that here. Okay, so that's our target URL, and then we're going to pass some data here. So just to clean this up, let's create init, and then in that I'll put all of this data. All right, so we have our headers. Content type's going to be JSON, method's going to be post, and then in this case, we're going to have our credentials object, not our article object, passed, and that'll be what I passed here. Okay, so calling fetch, again, if you remember, returns a promise. So that promise is going to be returned from our login method, and hopefully if that's successful, we should get correct results. So let's see. All right, so we actually have unit tests that we could use to verify this. So let's actually give that a run, see if we pass it. If we do, we can continue. If we don't, we definitely want to see why we're not passing it. So let's bring up a new terminal. I'm going to run npm run test. So when I did this yesterday, I actually had to update something called Watchman. If you get an error that's something to the tune of FS events can only be run using Darwin. Again, a weird error. I had no idea what it meant, so I kind of Googled it. A lot of responses said you need to install Watchman on your computer, so you can just do npm install Watchman. And that hopefully should clean up your errors. I had to actually install some additional Xcode command tools or something. So yeah, if you guys are running into that, definitely reach out if you can't figure it out. But okay, so I ran my test cases, again, via npm run test, and it looks like I passed one test case. That seems great. Again, if you want to look at the test case, you go to usersapi.test. Again, that's just kind of simulating that fetch and comparing what we expect with what our login is providing. Again, so our login is providing a promise, so we're doing a .then on the result of that, and then that's what the test case is using. However, for, again, my preference, I prefer using async await, so that actually changes kind of how this function behaves. when you are using async await, you will actually complete the entire process or resolve the promise, and then you return the data. So I'm actually going to change this to async await. So the first thing is I'm going to make this an async function. Then I'm going to store my response. Again, this await keyword will actually wait for this promise that's returned to resolve, and then it will give us back that the value. So that'll be a response that we get back. Once we have the response, we're going to get some data, and that data will be from processing JSON. And again, this is another promise that's generated, so we're going to need to use await. And then at that point, let's console log that data, just so we can kind of see what it looks like. And finally, let's return that data. Before I proceed, any questions so far on what we're trying to do here? Again, this credentials object will just contain an email and password. This is what's created when a user actually goes to our login page and fills out that form and attempts to log in. We'll extract that data, and that's what will be passed to the credentials object, and then we'll send that in our post message body. All right, and then we wait for the response from the server. Hopefully everything went well. The data, again, if everything went well, should look something like this. They'll have an ID, and this ID is actually a token value, or you can think of it like a session ID. I know we also have ID within the user. Again, this is the ID record for the actual user in our server's database versus this ID, again, should be just read as token. Okay, so, all right, I think I have this implemented correct. Again, we definitely want to test that. So let's kind of hook this up. So we've completed our user API. We tested it with the test case that was there. Again, I'm failing my test case now because I changed this to async await. So we're actually returning the actual data that we want, not a promise. So that's why my test case is failing now. But at that point, I don't care about that test case. So I'm just going to get rid of that terminal window. All right, let's see what else we need to do. So we passed our test case. Now we want to store our user objects using React context. So I'm actually going to skip over this part. Apologies for kind of going out of line with the curriculum. I'm not going to dive into using context right now. I just want to wire this up based on what I know right now on how to pass around data. And then we could look into using React context and why that's potentially useful in this use case, or I guess other use cases that you might encounter. All right, so I just want to see if I'm successfully getting, if I'm able to log in, and if I am, what the data looks like when I get back. So that's my objective right now. So again, I'm going to skip over this context part, and let's kind of focus on here. So once we get our login, we're going to pass it back to our parent component. So let's kind of walk through that. So again, just a refresher here. Let me make this a little smaller. App.js is like our parent component. That has a bunch of child components. We have a router here. So we're going to create some child components. We have homepage, login page, add article page, and then section page. So a bunch of child components, but our app kind of houses all of those. So this is our parent component. And then from our login page, we're going to be getting that user data from that fetch request, right? So we want to ultimately pass the login information back to our parent so that our parent can kind of manage it and kind of give it to whichever child components need that data. So let's go back to our login page. I don't think I brought it up yet. All right, so login. So again, this is the code that was provided for us. Yesterday, we created this form on our login page and then had the ability to extract the values out of our form when the user hits submit. But we're not actually doing anything with those values. So that's something we're going to add in new site 6 here. All right, so let's go about doing that. I'm going to first import my user's API. So user API from, and let's find it. It's in API / user tab. All right, there we go. So now we have access to our user API. User API has one method in it. That's login. And login is going to take some credentials. Okay, so let's create those credentials. It's going to be an object, And let's see, it's going to have an email in it, and it's going to have a password in it. And again, these are the values that we were printing out before. So I'm actually going to get rid of these console logs. I'm assuming that everything from site 5 was working correctly. And just store that in our credentials object. Let's just comment it out in case we need to investigate it further. So again, the prevent default, just kind of backup step, prevents the, again, as you would expect, the default behavior for the submit button. Normally that would post and refresh the page. In this case, we don't want to do that. So we're going to prevent the default behavior from the form submit. And instead, we're going to do whatever we want here. So we're going to grab the credentials and then pass that to our login. Again, since I've made my login function async await, I'm actually going to get data back from it. Again, if you did not choose to use async await, which is totally fine. Again, I think the curriculum page might, for new site 6, might have wanted you to create a promise that's returned. That's totally fine. It's essentially the same thing. Your code is going to look slightly different. If you return a promise, you're going to have to chain a .then onto the promise that's returned, so that whatever is in your .then will be executed once the promise is resolved. As opposed to async await, the wait already kind of took care of that resolving. So whenever the promise did resolve, await kind of returned and then proceeded with that async execution in that function. All right, so we're gonna get some data back. Let's call that user info. And okay, let's not get too far on this. So let's say if we have something that's not null here, let's just print out that user info. I guess we're actually doing that in our login, aren't we? Yeah, we're console logging. All right, we'll take it out of here. And login page. Okay, so we're going to print out the user info. All right, let's give this a run. Again, there definitely could be something we did incorrect, but if not, we should get the console log of our user info. All right, let's give this a run. Refresh here. Things seems to be good. Let's go to our login page. So that's here. We're going to enter login. Again, this comes from the curriculum page. You can try to log in with whatever you want. So let's actually try logging in with something that's just made up. So I'm going to do madeup@donuts.com and whatever password I want. Let's see what we get back. So if I hit submit, nothing seems to be happening. Let's see. So user info, let's bring up our property inspector. Okay, so we're getting a promise that's console log. What is this? All right. So every time we hit submit, we're getting a promise. Let's take a look at that. Login. Wait. All right, I'm not sure where that promise is coming from. So we're getting data, JSON. These are all pending. All right, so we're getting a 401 response. So in that case, that's where our server said this authentication failed and returned a 401. So that's the error I'm seeing here. So that's passed back in an error, an object that has an error field. So we can actually check for that. How do we do this? Let's go to our login page. If, let's just say, let's call this data. Data error. That's console.error.data.error. All right, so if we get something back that has that's an object that has an error field on it, because that's what I see in this promise that's returned, we want to just print out that error so we can see it. Else, we're going to assume that we are successful. So we'll print out the data. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So let's go whatever at whatever. I'm not sure why I'm not getting anything here. Oh, there. All right, so sorry, I had my errors filtered out. So in this case, we see our error message. It, again, as we expected, the 401, which is the response here, coming from our server. So that's our error case. Let's actually try a successful login now. So let's, the credentials were john@doe.com, and the password was open sesame. Let's hit submit and see what happens. Okay, so if you kind of look in here, we have this object that has a bunch of fields in it, and this looks very similar, if not the same, as what we expected from our curriculum page. So it's going back there. We want to have something that looks like this. So ID token, created, user ID, and the user information. So again, just looking in my property inspector here, my console, I printed out this promise that has user information. So John, ID 1, email. All right, so this looks like what I expect to get returned if I have a successful login. Any questions?
How come that if-else statement worked without any brackets?
Which one, this one?
Yes, sir.
What do you, sorry, what do you mean it worked without any brackets?
It doesn't have curly braces at the end.
Oh, sorry. Gotcha.
It's because it's one line ifs and one line else.
Gotcha. Yeah. So so in this case, I definitely could and maybe should have curly brackets. I would actually say it's good practice to have them, even if you have one line. But the special case is if you only have one expression or one line in your if body, you don't need those curly braces. But the problem with this is, let's say I want to add another line here, and I want to do something like, call some function, and I want to pass my data into it. In this case, looking at this code, the formatting tells me, okay, these two lines will be executed in this if statement. That's actually not true. So let's get rid of this else just currently. So yeah, if I kind of look at this as a just reader of this code, okay, I have if statement. If this is true, I'm going to do both of these things. That's actually not what's happening. So the formatting here is kind of misleading because I don't have the curly braces here. If I have this, everything will be well. And now if I want to add more stuff, everything's going to be fine. But if I left off those curly brackets, again, adding this new line here, this is actually outside the if. So again, since I formatted it in a bad way, it looks like it's in this if, but it's actually being executed outside the if. So this is actually what it's doing, even though this is not Python, so the tabbing is not relevant. I could tab it all I want. That's still not going to affect where it lives in the execution. So yeah, good question there. Actually, I should be using curly brackets. I usually don't for one line just because it's a little quicker, but let's make it clear. So again, if we get an error, so the response from the server will have an object that has an error field. That's why I'm doing data.error. This isn't some predefined value. Again, I read the data that's coming in an error case, and then I know that there will be an error field if I fail my login. Again, the server could have passed some other field, and I would just need to know that. Again, that would go back to reading documentation. We should have documentation for our own stuff if anyone else is going to be using it. All right, so if that's else we wanted to, we're just console logging it at this point. Console.log our data. All right, cool. All right, so I think that was just testing that our login is either successful or on the error case what we get back. So we can kind of handle that in a better manner instead of just console.logging it. So let's try doing that. Let's see. All right, we're down here. All right, so let's see what they want us to do. All right, so we want to redirect the page. If we're successful with our login, we just want to go to the home page, which is common behavior. We don't want to just sit there necessarily. So yeah, we're going to use this.props.history.push, and we're going to push the homepage URL, and that should redirect us. Add a console.log. Okay, so let's kind of hook this up. So to get access to this, we need to actually pass down some props to our login page. So this is, I guess, what I skipped over. So let's actually take a look at this. In our app.js, we have a bunch of routes, and we're simply passing a component. So in this case, for our login, we just pass in the login page. But we don't really have the ability to pass in any props to those login pages the way we have it right now. So instead of using component, we're going to use something called render. And let's just kind of read the docs. The React docs are pretty good for the router. So that's context. Let's search for React router. Let's see docs. Did I find what I want? Yep. So reactrouter.com should be where hopefully it takes you. And then this, again, great documentation. They have code examples with descriptions side by side. So I think this is really nice formatting. I'm going to go down to where are we right now? We're in route. So that's the component we're using. So let's look at route. And, we use the component function or the components where we pass in a component value to it. But we actually want to use something else. So just beneath that, there's a render function. And let's kind of look how we might use this. So in this case, we have our route component. We're still going to have our path. But in this case, we're going to have a render, and we need to pass a function to it, looks like. So in this case, in this example, it's just rendering a div with a value of home in it. But we could pass props to it. So let's take a look at that example. You can spread out route props. Okay, so yeah, this gives us the ability to pass in the route props. So let's do that here. I'm going to change this to render. All right, and then I'm actually going to call a function here. So call that render login page. Simple enough. And then I'm going to add that function. So render login page. Again, I'm going to use a fat arrow, otherwise known as anonymous function here, so that my this binding will automatically work for me instead of me manually binding it. So render login page. This will take in route props. And then I want to simply return a rendering. So this would be login page. And now I could actually pass props down to it. So login page will take, let's see, say history. I think this is, again, from the curriculum page. Let's see what they have there for us. Yep, history equals props.history. And then just copy this over and modify it. Okay, so history equals props. So mine I call route props. History. Again, this is coming from the router. And then I need some login. So handle login. So handle login is going to be what we ultimately call from our login page. Once we have the correct data, we're going to pass that data to our parent component, which in this case is app. So let's create a function for that. Let's call it handle login. And this will be an anonymous function. And this will simply take in the user info and store it somewhere. So since I'm going to be storing it, I need state. And let's call this user. And the default will be null. And in this case, when we get this value, we're going to call this set state to actually update this user value. So state and user info. All right. So again, we'll see this in use shortly, but we're going to pass that down to our login page via props. So this.handle login should be passed down, and we also have history. So we're going to be using the history value just to redirect our user. Okay, so let's go back to our login page then. All right, so in our success case, we want to do two things. We want to pass back the data to our parent, and then we want to redirect the user automatically to the home page. So let's take care of the second part first. That's a little easier. I'm just going to do this props.history push, and then the URL for our home page is simply the root. So that should redirect. Let's put a comment, redirect to home page. Okay, and then the other part is we need to pass this user info. So let's create user info. Again, if I'm going too quickly or if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me. So user info is going to be an object, and let's pass some what values we want here. So user info, let's say token will be a value, and user name will be a value. Again, I'm just going to extract this value from the data that we're getting back. Again, the data, just to reiterate, is all this stuff, but I actually don't really care about, I don't care about the created time. I don't really care about the user ID. The only thing I really care about is the token, because that's what I'm going to be passing back for authenticated requests. And the username, again, I might use in certain cases, so I'm just going to store that. So yeah, so let's get that value from our data. So data.id will be our token, and then data.user.username, if I remember correctly. Yep, so data is this entire thing. .id is going to get that token value, and then .user.username should get the actual username. So yep, so that's going to be my user info, and then once I have that, I'm going to call this props.handle login. Again, this was the callback that we passed down via props from our parents, and this will take in user info. All right, so we're going to just basically pass some data back to our parents component, and the parent component will do whatever it wants with it. So let's go back to that. So again, when we call this function handle login, that should pass back the user info here, and we're simply taking that user info and updating our internal state in app.js. Okay, let's actually test this out. So again, we should be redirected using the history object, and then we should also get user info here. So let's do a console.log with that user info. Okay, looks like I got a couple errors I need to fix. Render login page is not defined. 30 part, I forgot my this. That seems to happen often. All right, I think we should be good now. Let me just expand this. All right, so I have a warning. Again, warnings, you definitely want to read them. They don't always need to be handled. Sometimes they might point to errors. In this case, the code that we shipped, it seems like one of our image tags is missing an alt property. So let's actually just fix that so this warning goes away. So that's in article and article.js. So that's in components, article.js. All right, so we have this image image element that doesn't have an alt attribute. So let's just add an empty string to make that happy. All right, great. We got compiled successfully, so we have no warnings. That makes me feel a little better. All right, let's give this a try. We go to my login page. Let's clear this. Clear console. All right, let's log in with john@doe.com. Password was open sesame. Okay, what did I get here? Okay, so it seems like this data didn't have username. So I have an error. Where was I? Login page. So it says this is not valid. Let's actually debug this. Again, I love going through the VS Code debugger, so this is a great opportunity for it. Let's set that up. Again, we've done this a few times, but just to reiterate, I'm going to create a launch.json file, select Chrome as my environment. I'm going to change the port in my URL to point to my React server, so that's port 3000. All right, so that looks good. Save that. Let's run that. It's going to pop open actually a new Chrome window. So that's one there. Okay, let's try going to login again. Login. It was john@doe.com and open sesame. Submit that. Okay, so we actually hit our breakpoint. So we can actually take a look at data, for example. Data is a pending promise. I think I did something wrong here. This shouldn't be a pending promise. So yeah, so in this case, data is not what I expected to be. So let's actually look back at our user API. What did I screw up here? So I have async here. I'm awaiting the responses. Not quite sure what's the deal here. So this data, we can break on it. All right. Oh, I know what the issue is. So we need to actually await on this async function. Did anyone catch that? So we're calling user API.login, but we're not actually waiting on that to return. So this is actually going to execute this and then continue on with the processing. It's not going to kind of halt here because we haven't told it to await. That was the key thing here. So let's make all this async. Again, so I want to use the await keyword. I need to use async here. So now this should wait for everything to complete, and then we should actually get data back. Before, this block of code was executing without waiting for this to return, which is not what I expected or wanted. All right, so let's see if this runs. Okay, let's try this one more time. john@do.com and password and sesame. Submit that. Okay, we hit this breakpoint, not continue. All right, so now I hit the breakpoint that's set in my login page. Let's actually take a look at data now. All right, so now this is actually the data we wanted. We have the ID, again, a little hard to see. Let me see if I can blow it up a little bit. But we have this data object that we get returned, and it has an ID field. This is the token. Again, we have this user object within our object that has an email, ID, username. So again, this is what I expected. So this looks good to me. Let's continue on with our execution. So to do that, I'm just going to hit the continue button here, right here, hit continue, and it should proceed. And let's take a look at, oh, don't want to save this. Let me actually move this down. I prefer on bottom. And let's filter out any errors. All right, so we have this object that we printed out. And again, this is what our user info is. We have our token and username. So this is actually what's going to be stored inside of our app.js. This user info is what we care about. So everything looks to be as expected. And that's getting printed out from right here. App.js console log that user info. So we're assuming that the set state was successful in setting the user value here. All right, so everything so far seems to be running pretty smoothly. Any questions, again, what we've done here? So just to review what we hooked up, we had the login page that had a form, but the values we weren't actually sending anywhere. So we took those values, we created, implemented our user API login function. This is gonna take in a credentials object, which just holds email and password. We're gonna pass that data inside the body of our message. Again, this is a post request. So we're gonna send that to our user API. That's gonna respond with some data. And if we are successful, the data should contain a token value, a user, like username, user ID, a bunch of other data returned to us. We take that data in our login page. Again, key thing, you need to have await, so you need everything to complete in that case to get that data back. And then we take that data and just strip off whatever we want from it. And then we store that data or those values in our app.js because that's our parent component. Everyone with me so far?
Where exactly are we getting, like when you entered John Doe and you got all his information, where is that all like happening?
So we entered, are you saying from the login page or where the stuff we're printing out here?
Yeah, like where's the token getting initiated?
Yeah, so the token, this is all being done from our server. So our server is just creating a token for us and passing that token to the client. So again, we're not worrying too much about the implementation of our server. That the server lives in this API folder and has a bunch of stuff going on. Again, I didn't write this. I just know that hey, this is a server that can authenticate user login and pass back a token. So that's what I'm relying on. But yeah, so again, we've hard-coded logins into our server. So that's why I'm using john@do.com. It's definitely one of these files. I've found it before. User.json.
You can use the big magnifying glass on the top left underneath your document button. Keep going top left.
Top left, right here.
Right there, and then search for whatever part of your credentials.
Okay.
You put Joe.
Sorry, thanks. There we go. Thanks. So readme, sample model. All right, there we are. Thanks.
When you click it, you have to click the line itself, though.
Gotcha. All right, yeah. So that's what I was looking for. Thank you for that assist. So in our server folder, there's a boot folder, and there's sample -model. This is where we have our fake login. So we have John at doe.com with Open Sesame. We also have Jane at doe.com and Bob at projects.com. So again, if you did want to add one, I don't think there's anything stopping you from adding whatever hard-coded login you want. But yeah, so that's where the data is coming from. And then the token creation, again, it's somewhere in this file. I've actually not dived into it. But at some point, we're just creating a token, passing it back to our client, and then our client can use that token value.
Ankur, can you go to users API real quick?
Absolutely.
The export default login, what's the reason that you have it structured like that? I just haven't seen the colon.
Gotcha. So I think if you do it this way, this should allow you, and let's actually test this out. Let's go to my login page. This should allow you to destructure it. So in this case, if I didn't want to have user API, I could do something like login, which would be my function. So this will actually destructure it, and then I think I could just call login here. If you didn't have, let's see, if you didn't have it as a key value pair, in this case, you won't be able to destructure it properly. So
there's a thing with JavaScript where if the key is the same as the value, you don't have to specify both. You can just specify login. And that's why in the previous challenges, you've just seen the function name, and that's the less verbose way. But if you do the colon, if you add the colon with the key and the value, that's the verbose way of saying it.
Okay, I mean, I was seeing an issue before where trying to destructure it this way. Let's actually try this out. So I removed that key value pair, just have login, and okay, let's give this a try. Yeah, so in this case, attempt and import login is not exported from user's API. Let's try to add this login back here. Does that make this happy? Nope, still not happy. Let's do login. Let's see if that makes it happy. Nope, still not happy. So yeah, I guess I'm not quite sure what the proper way to destructure this would be, but I'm just gonna go back to user API, just feel safer. Yeah, apologies. I guess I don't have a great answer for you why it's done this way. But it works, I guess, in this way, so I'm just gonna go forth with it. Thanks for the question, but yeah, sorry, I don't have, I guess, enough knowledge to accurately say what's going on here and why I can't structure it properly. All right, so let me add that back in, user API. And okay, so it seems like we made good progress. I think it's definitely time for us to take a break. So again, we got the data, we're just printing out the data, we're not actually using it within our website. So that's actually what we're gonna do next. But let's take a quick break. So I have 10:16 on my side. Let's take a 9-minute break, and we'll get back to actually using the token value for our needs in our application. All right, so now that we have our login information correctly, again, I think the one thing I did want to test is the redirect, so let me quickly take care of that. I think we saw it, but let's go back to our login page. Login, let me log in one more time. So it'll be John at doe.com. All right, so hit my breakpoint. That's not what I wanted, but all right, so we logged in successfully. Notice that we're at our homepage. Sorry, that went off screen. I know that's a typical magician trick where you kind of distract and, you know, do something off to the side. But yeah, we were successfully redirected after our login to our homepage, so that seems to be working correctly. So just wanted to verify that. Again, that's being done via this props.history.push. Again, this is from the router. Okay, cool. So let's proceed. So now that we have our data, we actually want to use that token value. So that's for article submission. So let's actually take a look at what happens right now if we try to submit an article. I'm going to go to add article. Let's just say something, some bylines, some abstract. All right, so I'm going to try to create this article. Hit submit. And notice I get an error. It says authorization required. This alert is actually coming from our code. So let's take a look at that. Let's go to add article page.js. Let's kind of take a look at this. So, all right, so assuming this alert's coming from line 26, where we are waiting, or we call add article with our article object. So again, this was something we created in a past news site challenge. We get our response, and then we actually check the response code. If it's 200, that means the add article request was successful, and then we do the success case. But in this case, it seems like our response status was not 200, and therefore we show that alert message. In that case, the server is telling us authentication is required. Okay, so one thing just to kind of review, I guess, we do have a try catch here, and that's good practice. So I think that's something I left off in my user API here. Like, probably should wrap this in a try catch in case there's an error. But where were we? All right, so this try catch is basically if there's any error from add article, it'll be caught here. The important, I guess, distinction here is that there actually wasn't an error from the request. The request was successful, and the response was simply, hey, you need to provide more data, or you're not authenticated to do this. So we still got a valid response from the server. The response was an error condition, but it wasn't actually an error that happened with the request, if that makes sense. That's why we're not handling this error in our catch. It's just we got a valid response, but the response said, hey, this was actually an error. So just make sure you understand that distinction. If there was actually a problem with add article, that's where the catch would come into play.
Isn't that why you're checking the status code and not just whether or not there's a response?
Yep.
Because you always get.
Yeah. So if you remember from a past Fetch API lecture, any error that happens, I guess, on the server, again, we'll still get a valid response, and yeah, we want to check the status. So there's also response.ok. This would be a true false value. OK, I believe, will be true if your status code is anywhere between 200 and 299. Meaning you got a valid response. So maybe checking OK here would be more sensible. But anyway, yeah, so we're going to get a response code, and the response code dictates what we're actually going to do. If it's between 200 and 299, then we know we got what we're looking for from our request. But if it's something else, then something obviously went wrong with our particular request that we're sending. Okay, so this is where we're going to actually use that token value that we obtained during our login. So we need to get this token value into our add article page. But currently, add article has no idea that that user info exists. This is where we need to pass it down as props. So if I go to app.js, again, app.js has this user value, and that's where we're storing the user info. But we want to pass it down to our add article page. So much like we did with our login page, we're going to use this render method. So I'm going to change this to render and do pretty much the same thing. I'm going to do this .render add article page and create this method. So let's do that here. Get rid of that, and yeah, it's going to be pretty simple function here. In this case, I'm not going to care about route props, so it's going to take in no parameters. I'm not passing anything with route props. This is going to be an add article page. And sorry, fat arrow there. And then I'm going to pass down, let's just call it user, and this state.user. All right, so we're just passing the user info down to our add article page. And if now that we have that as props, we can actually use that. So let's just have let user equal this state.props. props.user, and then we go into user.token, because that's the field on that object. So we're passing a token to our add article method. So let's actually update that. Yeah, they use this structuring here, and that seems to work correctly. So not sure what I was doing wrong before, but let's go to our article API and look at add article. So currently, add article only takes in an article object. We want to update that to take in a token. Again, let's kind of see what they're telling us. So yep, here on the curriculum page, it's saying we need to pass the token. So yep, single parameter, we want to make sure that it can take a token. So let's add that and add token here. And we need to pass that in our headers. So going back to our curriculum page, it says add a new property to the header, and that property should be authorization, and then the value should be the token argument. So that's what I'm going to do, just following directions here. So it's going to be authorization, and the value there will be the token string that we're passing back. All right, so now for our add article request, we're going to actually pass token so that our server can validate that this is the authorized action that we're doing. Okay, so let's, I think that's all we needed. So token being passed there. I think we should be able to create an article now. So let's try doing that. So let's put in the same values, some byline, this number, some abstract. Let's hit submit. Okay, so I hit submit, nothing happened. Is that a problem? Well, let's take a look at our code. So yeah, so I'm assuming we hit response.ok, and then we updated redirect to true, and that should have redirected us. So we actually didn't redirect, so maybe something's going wrong. Let's debug. As always, I like to do. So we didn't get an alert, so obviously response.ok must have been correct, but not sure why we didn't redirect here. So let's
Quick question.
Yep.
Can you go back to VS Code? On line 22, if response.ok, where's that .ok come from?
So that is from the response object. So let's look at add article. Add article returns promise. Yeah, so this can return a response object. Again, let's look at documentation for fetch, and we can kind of see where that's coming from. But good question there. So I'm going to go to fetch JavaScript, search for that. I mistyped it, but Google saves me. All right, the fetch API, click on fetch. All right, so it says window or worker global scope.fetch, which you're actually calling when you call fetch. I don't really know the specifics of this whole thing, but regardless, let's look at what this is going to respond. So a fetch promise only rejects when a network error, only when a network error is encountered. So this is where, again, the actual promise fails, and that's where the catch part or your try catch will be invoked. A fetch promise does not reject on HTTP errors. So again, this is what I was talking about before. So if you get a 404, which means your page doesn't exist, that's not actually a problem with your request, or it's not a problem with the fetch. It's just you're trying to go somewhere that doesn't exist. The server is going to say 404, but that's still working correctly, as in you would expect a 404 error, HTTP error, if you're going to a page that doesn't exist. Instead, they handle most check response.ok or response.status. So let's click on that. So response.ok is a read-only property for response. So sorry, the fetch request returns a response. So that's what I'm actually reading documentation for. So if I look at the properties for it, that's where I have response.ok.
All right.
This
Okay,
is
I see that.
indicating the response was successful. Again, as I said before, if your status code is anywhere between 200 and 299, your OK value should be true. Otherwise, it'd be false.
All right, thank you.
Okay. But again, there's a whole other list of properties you could check. Again, we were using status before. Status text, again, that's something else that might be relevant to you. Again, I don't know what response.trailers is, but there's a lot you have access to in your response object. Cool, thanks for that question. All right, so this returns a response. We're awaiting it in right here. So we get our response once add articles resolves the promise from fetch, and then we check .ok, and then we want to do something with that. So submit's not actually doing anything. I'm curious why. I have multiple windows open. Let's try this again. So I'm going to debug. All right, so let's try adding an article and see what happens. So some title. Again, I created a new session, so I'm not logged in. Some abstract. Submit. Why are you sleeping at me? Submit. Okay, so not sure why nothing's happening here.
Check your console in the browser for errors.
Good suggestion. So pairs. Error occurred posting article, cannot read property user of undefined. So it sounds like I screwed up something here. So
Check line 20 there. You're saying this dot state prop. Shouldn't it just be this prop
thank
user?
you. Yep. Good catch there. So again, this was throwing an error. So I had some invalid property. So this catch was actually catching that. And that's where that error message came from. So yep, good catch there. It should be this dot props, not this dot state dot props. So let's try running this. Close my property inspector. Let's try that one more time. So I'm still not logged in here. So I'm going to try some abstracts, whatever. Still nothing. Curious. This.props.user. That's what I was passing from app, right? So user equals this.state.user. That should be what I want. Head article page. Yeah, let's try debugging. Submit. All right, I hit an error. What's the error here? Going to tell me? No, it doesn't want to tell me what the error is. So continue and check again. Token of null. So I think I did the same thing. Yep. Token of null. Wait. Add article line 11.
Isn't that what we're expecting, Ankur, since you're not logged in? You don't have a token to pass?
Yeah, thank you. So I did that, I guess, a little unexpectedly. So if I go back to my app.js, my initial value is null. So I actually should be checking user, not calling user.token. So if I wanted to maybe do this a different way, I could initialize this to like have token, and that token can be null. In that case, I wouldn't be running into this issue that I'm doing right now. But yeah, thank you for getting to that. But I'm going to make this null because that's how I want to do it. But I need to be smart about it. So add article page. I can't call, I can't call anything on a null object. So I should probably check. We do token equals. So use a ternary. If my user is valid, I can do this props user. Again, it's totally up to you. If you feel like it makes more sense to initialize an empty user info object and that make it easier, then that's totally valid. In this case, I just want to have a null value for that info. So in this case, I need to actually check if this is null or not. So I'll do this props.user.token. Or if my user doesn't exist, I'll just use empty string. All right, in this case, I'll pass in token. Good catch there, guys. So we'll go there. Okay, let's try that again. Some title, some byline, whatever. All right, so we actually didn't get an error this time. That's what we wanted. So let's see. We didn't get an OK status though. Why didn't we get an OK status? It's likely because we're not logged in. So let's see what the alert is. Yep, authorization required. Let's close this. But yeah, so that's what we expected. Again, we never bothered to log in, so we passed an invalid token with our request, and our server's yelling at us saying, hey, you need to be authorized. So that's working as I would expect. Let's actually try to log in, and then we can add articles. So I'm going to go to my login page. Log in. Same credentials. Okay, we got redirected to our homepage as expected. Let's try adding an article. Click here, same stuff. Submit. Okay, so we got redirected to our homepage. Again, that's what we expected based on our logic here. So we had a redirect state value. We set that redirect state value to true on success. So again, in the response.ok case, we set that to true. And then in our render, we check if redirect is true. We simply redirect to that homepage. Again, we could have just done it with the history object, kind of like we did it in our login page, but this is another way you can redirect. This redirect is coming from reactrouter.dom or /dom. So that redirect can simply take in a 2 value and that automatically redirect you. So multiple ways to do the same thing. I actually prefer this way rather than messing with the this.props.history, but totally up to you. All right, so seems like we're using the token correctly in our add article page. Let's go back to our new site 6 write-up. Yep, authenticated article submission. This is using context, but we're going to ignore that for now. All right, so the next thing we want to do is app nav. App nav, we simply want to show a login link if they're not logged in, or we want to show a log out link if they are logged in. So this is going to be in our app nav, which is on every page. And then we're going to actually add a logout route as such. All right, so let's actually go about that. That shouldn't be too many more steps, but let's go to our app.js. So we have our app nav. This app nav should take in the user info also. So I'm going to do user equals the same value here. All right, so app nav should have a user prop. Let's dive into app nav, which is in our components folder. Nav. All right. So again, we should have our props here. Let's see. Okay, so let's just do some conditional rendering here. Again, my render is kind of getting kind of messy because I have some conditional here. I would probably break this out into a function to clean it up, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to do it in place. So here, I want to check if this props.user is valid. If that is, let's show. Let's see. All right, let's nest this in a new nav item. Nav item. And we'll put that in there. Okay. So this will be conditional. So if the user is a non-null object, then we want to show link to, and this is going to go to our logout route. Again, we still need to add this, but we will do that shortly. And this will say logout. All right, so if they're logged in already, that means that the user value should be non-null. So otherwise that's a truthy value, which means we'll do this case. If the user value is null, we'll have a link to our login page. Login. Let's say I want to show something extra here, so we'll do. Just gonna format this a little better. Since we do have our user, we could do this.props.username. Again, this is something else I was storing in the user info, so I'm just gonna take advantage of it here. Log out, log in. All right, that looks like what I need. So I need to add this logout route to my application. So let me go here, add it right beneath log in. We'll do log out. And this will render is that what I wanted to do? So constant, it's going to copy and paste from the curriculum. This is pretty straightforward. So I have a render logout. takes in props. Okay, so logout is actually going to clear our internal state value for user. It's going to set it to null, and then it's going to redirect us to login page. So we're not actually going to create a component for our logout page because we don't actually have a landing spot. In that case, we're just going to clear our data and redirect to login, which would make sense in most cases. So that's that render logout page, render logout page, I guess is the name of it. Set state and redirect. So thinking about this a little more in depth, I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it because set state is going to be asynchronous. So if we're redirected to a page, theoretically, like the user value might not be null right away. That could cause like edge case problems, but let's just trust that this will work effectively enough for us. Again, if we wanted to handle this a different way, we could do the redirect in component did update. So we could check the user value in component did update. Again, this is one of our lifecycle methods that we went over on Monday. And in component did update, we could check, all right, is our user value null? If it is, then maybe redirect, and we might need some additional logic to not do that in every case. But okay, we're just gonna go with this because that's what they gave us. So logout page. All right, let's kind of try this out. Again, just to review, app nav takes in a user prop. We check that prop and conditionally display a login or logout based on if they're logged in or logged out. Okay, let's see if this actually works. Redirect is not defined. That's because I need to include it. So let's go up here. We have router, route. We need to have redirect from React router down. Save that. All right, that made it happy. So, okay, so now we have our homepage. Notice in the top corner, we have a login nav item. And that's because we're not logged in right now. So let's see if I click that. All right, great, taken to my login page. That looks to be as working. Open Sesame. All right, I submitted it. Notice that I got logged in. Notice that this says logout now, but I actually don't have my username here. So let's quickly fix that. Not sure why I left off there. So let's that prop set username. This is going to be user.username. So user is my object that has a property username on it. So let's save that. Got to log in again. John. So it's quite repetitive. Open Sesame. Okay, now notice here it says logout and it has the username. So this particular username is John. But yes, we actually take advantage of that user info here. So we're logged in. Let's go to our add article page. And yep, we do the same thing we did before of adding article. Kind of thinking about this, it's not as user friendly as in if I'm not logged in, I should maybe not even give them the option or the user the option to create an article because they're just going to get an error saying authorization required. So let's quickly update my login page to conditionally do that. So let's see. Let's add an if statement here. If this props.user is null, so I'm going to do inverse of that. So basically, if my user doesn't exist, I'm going to conditionally just show return h3. You need to log in to create article. All right, just a friendly error message to our users so they don't go through the business of creating an article and then failing to do so. So let's add a link here. And let's link to our login page.
You're adding this on the login instead of the add article.
Thank you. Definitely losing my bearings here. All right, so that's login page. Yep, thanks for that catch. You guys are great at catching my mistakes. So I actually want to do my add article page. So we'll add the if statement here. So if this.props.user is null, that's why I have the exclamation mark here. So that null will be a falsy value. So if I invert it, that's going to be a truthy value. So in the case where this.props.user is null, I'm just going to show a message and not show the form there. So let me put that maybe up top. Okay, so let's see what happens now. We got link is not defined because I need to include it. So let's include it here. That make it happy. Yep. Okay. So I see this message, you need to log in, and I can actually click on login, and hopefully that should take me where I want to go. Just to clean this up a little bit more.
So in theory, could you also put that logic in the app.js to conditionally prevent the route from the user from even being able to go to that route?
Yep. Yep, definitely can. So the way we kind of do that with our log out, we simply just redirect to a login page. So for that's a good suggestion. Let's actually try that. Yeah, I like that idea. So again, multiple ways to kind of achieve good user functionality. So in this method, I'm actually allowing the user to get to the add article page. We're just going to show them a simple, hey, you need to log in, click this link, and go about it. So let's see that. All right, so you need to log in to create article content. Let me, let's see, div, style. Okay, so you need to log in, click login. All right, we're taking the login page. That looks to be working as I expect. Let's go with the other session. Let's go to app. So I believe the session here was when we're rendering our login page, if we actually, we have access to our user here, so it's actually kind of easier here where we could just say, oh, sorry, not login page. Why do I keep messing with this? Article page. We could have a check here. We could do something pretty similar to what we were doing before. If not this dot state, it's not a prop in this case, it is null. We can do something. So in this case, let's redirect to login. I think that should take care of it. Let's test that out. Let's save that. And go to my home page. Oh, home side. Sorry. All right. So, okay, I'm at my home page. Notice I need to log in. So that indicates that I'm not logged in right now. Let's actually go to our add article page. All right. Notice we actually went to our login page. So yeah, I think that's actually maybe better functionality. It saves the user from having to click something.
Oh, thank you. I like that.
No, thank you for that suggestion. I think that was a great suggestion. Again, it comes down to what you want to, how you want to design your user experience. So I would maybe argue, like, if I click on this link and I'm taken to the login page without any notification, might be confusing. Like, I'd be like, wait, I tried to add an article. Why am I at the login page? Like, usually the user can put two and two together. My personal taste, I would just have some prompt saying, hey, you need to log in before you can access this page. But either way, we're taken to our login page, and let's actually log in. John Doe, open Sesame, submit. Okay, so now we have our logout option here. Let's go back to add article page. Again, if we're correctly logged in, we should not be redirected to the login page. Let's click that. Yep, notice we actually got to the add article page, so that looks great. Let's add one more article just for good measure. The Lion King was a great movie. Hopefully you all agree. Submit. All right, their article get added. Yep, there we go. This was the first article we added, and we also have Lion King that get added. So that looks like we've hooked up everything correctly now. Let's see if our search works. Yep, search still works. All right, let's go back to our new site 6 page. Make sure we took care of everything. So again, we updated app nav as requested. We have a login, logout conditionally rendered based on the state of the user. And then we also add that route for logging out. Yep. Okay, so I guess that's the suggestion they were going with. If the user is not logged in and attempts to go to add article, they should redirect to the login page. So yeah, I think that's what they wanted us to do. If the user is logged in, yep, looks like everything seems to be working correctly. So we have achieved our tasks. We could, wash our hands and just proceed with our day. But let's actually talk about concepts now. So we got everything working. So everything's right. We could definitely take this as satisfactory. But we want to introduce a new concept, and that's called user context. So I guess before I dive into this, let's take a quick break. So I definitely want to make sure we're taking enough breaks. So I have 10:58 on my side. Let's take a 7-minute break. Please try to be back by 11:05. And then we're going to cover what the React API context kind of offers us and why it can be useful especially when your site grows larger and larger.